Hello everybody, welcome to another video. If you've been out of the loop, about 2 days ago, ArenaNet bombed us with a ton of news, mostly to do with the future of expansions with the game. I'm not going to cover all of that again here, but essentially they illustrated this idea in what I believe was a fairly poorly written blog post, to be honest, that they've struggled to do Living World and expansions. The swapping between the two of them as development focuses has caused these big gaps throughout the game's years, and that's true. You know, you look at the last 10 years of Guild Wars 2, you compare it to the last 10 years of a lot of MMOs, we have had these huge gaps with Guild Wars where they don't exist otherwise. And so, in an attempt to remove those, they are kind of merging everything into one, where all they focus on now are expansions. But it means the expansions are going to feel a little bit different. They are going to be slightly smaller in scope, but much more regular, like maybe even yearly. Probably even yearly seems to be the big news, and so that's going to change the amount of post patches you get for X-Packs and so on. So it's all very big and exciting. You can check out my other videos on that. But at the end of the post, that basically meant they could reveal what's coming up for the game right now. So at the end of next week, basically the end of February, we're going to get our first patch, and it's under this new system. It's a new type of thing where it's just an extension to End of Dragons, and we'll be getting a couple of those patches before then we move into the next X-Pack. So it was already quite interesting wondering what's going on with Living World, air quotes. It's not called Living World anymore. It was already interesting wondering how they were going to expand on the End of Dragons story, where we might go in the world, what we might see. Now it's even more interesting, and actually quite a scary proposition, I think, too, because it sounds like we're not going to have many patches. Now, ArenaNet have been cagey about it. We might have as few as, like, just 3 updates, maybe even only 2 updates, I don't know, maybe that's a bit nuts, because the next expansion is something they'll start marketing, and then that's presumably, as they've explained, going to be a new story in a new area of the world, more self-contained than like doing some massive long arc like about the Elder Dragons. So there's a lot of focus for me now on exactly what they will do next. At the very end of the blog post, they had some teasers for us, so I'm going to run through what I expect to see in this next patch, and also what I want to see as well. So just to recap, here's what they said. The spring roadmap. The next chapter of End of Dragons arrives on February the 28th, okay? And as I speak into the microphone, it's the 16th. It's a week and a little bit away. With familiar allies like Detective Rama and his hat at your side. So they explicitly mention Rama, but I'm sure this also means Ivan. I'm sure this means basically everyone in that detective agency. A bit more Marjorie. And Marjorie, if you played all of End of Dragons, including like the side quests at the end of the X-Pack that introduce you to Marjorie's sisters and help her to sort of reinvigorate her love and her understanding of the land, we'll be hanging out with a slightly tweaked feeling Marjorie, which I think could be really interesting. And basically that crew, I guess, is who we'll get. They say you'll travel to a new location in Cantha and come face to face with a deadly foe that resides deep within the Jade Sea. So, it's interesting because there was a teaser a couple of months ago where they posted this screenshot. I did a video about this, and at the time, I actually said I thought it was coloured. You know, the grading is very similar to the Jade Sea, and it had some, like, Jade Quarry-esque, you know, aspects to it. So it looked like a place where maybe people would dig in the Jade Sea. But also, you know, the foreground looked different to the background. It also looked like it could have been a city map. It could have been something with Kanaxai City. Now, if I look at the End of Dragons lore itself, there's much more interesting stuff going on at Kanaxai Center, or just Kanaxai City, and the old city, and the idea of these endless risen coming out of Raisu Palace, these oligarchic vampire people with eternal life. There's a lot of really fascinating stuff about the city. So I actually, in that previous video, suggested I thought that they were going to do the city, not the Jade Sea. I guess that's wrong. By the way, the characters on this screenshot as well, there was a bit of follow-up discussion. I never actually quite got into a video and spoke into the microphone in the end. If you read the comments closely like I do, you will have heard this. But those characters on screen, I thought, oh, maybe these are the you know, the celestial blessing, eternal life guys that feed on blood. Apparently, though, it was just stock concept art. It was some concept art that had been made, and it was just sort of hanging around, so they dumped them in. So, I mean, I still think that there's a case to be made that it could be both. You know, they are representing the fact there are some big, important characters of around that number lurking in the background of the next story, but we only have some stock concept art for now. Or it could just be nothing. But anyway, so that was this image. I thought we were going to be more city-based. This post now feels more like the Jade Sea, but let's read this sentence again very carefully. With familiar allies like Detective Rama and your hat at your side, you'll travel to a new location in Cantha and come face to face with a deadly foe that resides deep within the Jade Sea. So you're going to think I'm being a bit of a pedant here, I'm trying to wriggle around or something. Technically, this could, all they've said is a new location. Technically, it could be anywhere in Cantha. I'm not going to say a city map. It could be anywhere in Cantha. It's just that by the end of the patch, we end up having like a dungeon-esque experience, an experience a bit like Farron of the First City, an experience a bit like I don't want to say a DRM because DRM's always overlapped with the pre-existing areas of the world, but we may visit the Jade Sea at the end of the storyline, you know, a bit like how we visited north of Brisbane Wildlands in a patch that was mostly set in Siren's Landing in Ore. You know, they can do these extra things, and I say this not just because I am compelled by the idea of a city map, and maybe they'll do both, and that the sentence works for this. I actually say this because I think that the new format of these patches it's essential that ArenaNet are able to do stuff like this, because look at what we've got now. If we only have a couple of releases, and in fact, if there's only going to be one map in all of those releases that they just expand patch by patch, that severely limited the scope of the number of places we can go. If you wanted to go, say, here on the End of Dragon's World map, the Kirin Peak, because you were curious about how they actually wrote that information on there, and they've got, you know, a little bit of suggestive art there. If you wanted to go deeper into the Echovow Forest, if you wanted to go deeper into the city and see Raisu Palace, if you wanted to go to some of these unseen mountain ranges that we didn't even get in the first game, let alone the second, well, when you hear that there's going to be a Jade Sea map, that's not going to happen anymore. That wasn't the case, say, in Season 4. In Season 4, we had lots of different maps dotted around, and so, yeah, they had the time to do the Sandswept Isles, an unseen mountain range or island chain that was there on Guild Wars 1, but we couldn't visit, on the map art in Guild Wars 1, but we couldn't visit. And then finally in the sequel we were able to do. It's essential that this new idea ArenaNet has the space to take us to these other places. I don't know whether they need to call it a formal gameplay feature or something, but, you know, look back at Core as well. Look at places like the Wizard's Tower. People are going to want this. So, again, returning to this sentence, they say you'll travel to a new location and come face to face with a deadly foe. Maybe they're disconnected. For the rest of this video, though, I'm going to assume that what we're getting is a Jade Sea map, and we'll see how it feels. Also, for what it's worth, these upcoming patches might not be exactly the same as what we get after the next expansion. These ones might be a little different in scope and in, you know, how many there are. I actually really like the idea. You know, this is Cantha, and it's based on Guild Wars 1's Cantha, where the big thing was the Jade Sea and the Echovow Forest. I kind of do love the idea of getting a Jade Sea patch and an Echovow patch. And what that would allow us to do as well is deal with one patch dealing with the Guild Wars 1 Elite Mission storyline, Kanaxai, a monster in the depths of the Jade Sea, which we'll get to in just a second. And it would give them time as well, if they did an Echovow map afterwards, it would give them time to talk about Ergos too. Both of these are stories, content pieces, lore ideas that got lots of really interesting, like, teasers in End of Dragons. And now it's like, well, these teasers are fun, but if we're just getting a couple of patches and then we're going somewhere completely new, these teasers may never end up going anywhere, especially since I'm not a big believer in Guild Wars 3. So, yeah, pretty interesting stuff, and you can see why now this next patch, there is a lot of focus on exactly how they deal with it. So, with this information, they say the storyline will conclude a few months later with an update that introduces an additional playable space to the map, as I said, an expansion to the map, adds meta events and boss encounters. Suggestive there may be that there won't be a meta event immediately. Next week, we're not even going to have a meta there. I think we will. I think they'll just expand on it, you know. Drytop had a meta, and then they expanded it. Bureau Marches had a meta, and then they added a new meta. You know, first we had the Storms of Winter, and then we had the Drakkar. For Drizzlewood, they had a meta that they just expanded on. So I assume they'll do something there. There'll be some new world boss thing we can play. And lays the groundwork for future to be announced adventures. So a little bit on the story here as well. Another thing that this patch has to do is start establishing what the new storyline's going to be. And it doesn't have to be a storyline that's going to span 10 years, but it's got to be a storyline people are interested and captivated by. They can obviously pull on any old piece of lore that they like, but I think they've obviously got to figure out why our characters of today now care. The big thing for me is a Tyria without Elder Dragons as a threat. What I want to see is much more interfactional conflict. I want to see the Char start bristling I want to see, you know, the North, particularly against the humans. I want to see maybe the Centaur. You know, I want to see conflicts between the different people that are around, because now there's not an existential threat forcing everyone to band together. That may not even happen if the new idea is to keep shunting us off to new areas of the world, new areas of the mists. But, and again, that's another weird thing. Living World, I celebrate that it's gone. But as a phrase, Living World was speaking about this idea of, like, being able to continually evolve Tyria and tell stories and see how things update. You know, like, when POF came out, we had a bunch of refugees added to Lion's Arch and stuff. I hope there's still a lot of space in this game for those kinds of updates too, but on a more significant level as well, so we can keep pushing the setting. Because right now, with no Elder Dragons even around, the setting is in a very settled, kind of boring place, I think, and I want to see the, you know, I want to see it get stirred up a bit. Anyway, unlike a Living World release, all owners of End of Dragons get access to this. There's no gem gate, no pressure to log in. So there's your little perk for an active player, as I suspect you guys watching also are. That's really not too much of a perk for me, but hey. There is also another little comment here. There's less information here, but they say in the first half of the year there'll be the Suwon legendaries. So that will be variant 6. The thing I'm really excited about there is, will they do a variant 7, a void variant for getting them all? I think that would be fantastic. But that's just the first half of the year. A void variant could be the second half of the year. There are going to be balance patches. We've actually already seen the first of those two. There's a new fractal coming with a CM straight away. Really keen to see that. I hope it's Canthan themed. And multiple updates to World vs. World. DirectX 11, Chromium, blah, 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 which some of this we've seen, some of it's half implemented right now. They also end by saying we might have a few more surprises in store for you as well. So there you go, that's the official information. Now let me take you into the land of speculation and my desires. First of all, we have this image. It was in the blog post. I've done nothing but gloss over it for the past few videos here now. Well, what do we see? Well, again, it feels like the Jade Sea. And so, again, you might just say, well, it's going to be a Jade Sea map. But what's clear as well is that we're underground, or under the Jade. Now, obviously, Dragon's End already had a section of the map that was under the Jade. It was very dark, gloomy. If you tried to swim in the water down there, you'd take damage. It was, you know, essentially feeling very Void influenced. This next story is going to take place after the Void disaster is over. And so the vibe beneath the Jade Sea could technically be very different. Now, one thing I always loved about going to Cantha, the idea of Cantha in Guild Wars 2, for years I talked about this, and it's weird that it's now history, but I liked the idea that in Guild Wars 2, they could do an Echo Vowed Forest, and because Guild Wars 2 has the Z-axis, and because there are zip lines, and, you know, there's the Draconis Mons, you know, like Spider-Man mastery that we've had, because we have mounts and bouncing mushrooms and stuff, the Echo Vowed Forest could be a really vertical map where you climb super high and you go into the canopy. That is something that you kind of experience, I think, in the Echo Vowed Forest in Guild Wars 2. But the other thing I always said was, look, you can do verticality in the forest, you can do verticality in the sea as well. You can go really deep down in the sea. And we didn't really get that. I mean, yes, there is verticality for, like, some spectacle in some of these vistas and areas you go to. Don't get me wrong. I mean, ever since Heart of Thorns, these maps are very high and can go very low. But it's not quite what I really wanted. The truth is that you've got the Jade layer, and it's not too much further down that there's the water beneath it. And that the tunnels down there are amazing in Dragon's End, but they're not that deep down, right? You don't really get this sense of an epic quarry where we're mining down and down and down and down. And the story that was essentially presented in Guild Wars 1 for this, for those of you out of the loop, it's a very Tolkien-esque dwarven thing. It's they dig too greedily, they dig too deep, and they unleash some malice, some evil. And what it does is it messes with people's minds. Luxons that went too deep became outcasts. They started going crazy. And basically, they broke into an area that was, like, very close to the mist, it seemed, very thin. There was a demon down there called Kanaxai. And so, essentially, the first ever Guild Wars raid for the franchise. It was called an Elite Mission. It was 12-man. It was a very different format to what we see in contemporary MMO gaming. And yes, before I get comments about it, the Urgo's Warren was released at the exact same time, and you could maybe consider Underworld and the Fissure of Woe and the Sorrow's Furnace to also be early precursor raids, but whatever. But it was a dungeon where you went down, you ended up in this messed up, like, crazy looking corridor area beneath the Jade that started to not even feel like it was the same reality, and you found these demons there, and it was kind of the origin of these demons that would hunt you all over the campaign called Oni. Oni have been conspicuously missing from Cantha the whole way through End of Dragons. There's a couple of little references to them, there's some gear you can get based on the Oni, but so far in the game, Oni, one of my favourite things about the whole setting, these demonic assassins, they have not been seen in Guild Wars 2 yet. So when I look at this picture, and all of this story I'm telling you is called The Deep, this to me looks like The Deep. This to me looks like, in the next patch, what they will probably do is reintroduce us to Kanaxai, this idea of the outcast, the sickness beneath the Jade, the Void disaster is over, and maybe we're exploring down there and we're seeing messed up stuff is happening. And I think what they're doing is maybe opening the door to this idea of demons and some of the other threats from the mists, which is what the next expansion will start to deal with. And in fact, if I think about like episodic expansions, self-contained story expansions, each one can just be a different kind of like creepy, horrible threat like this. And Kanaxai is just kind of the first thing that will start introducing us to these kinds of horrors. I suspect it will start very small scale. It will be some kind of murder that we don't really understand. Detective Rama and Marjorie will get on the case. And, you know, Arnfell. But what I think we're looking at in this screenshot here might be the end of the story. In fact, knowing a strike mission is coming, I think what we're looking at is a strike mission with the 3 platforms here. I think we're going to have a final boss against some demons, maybe Kanaxai itself, or an Oni. I think even just a big badass Oni would be very cool. And I think the story's going to end with a fight against that, and there will be a strike mission edition of it. Just like there's a strike mission edition of Marjorie or Ivanka. That's a weird thing to say very fast. Or Ivanka or Minsley or whatever. And so, you know, you'll be able to repeatedly do this in the end game if you like. And I repeat, the normal modes of those are very, very simple. Everyone should get in and do them. And then they'll add a CM to it later. So I think that's what we're looking at. And I think if you're kind of a raiding style Guild Wars 2 player, you're probably going to see a lot of this room. I don't know. It could also be a meta event. It could just be in the map somewhere. But that's my thought for the next JC map. But there is an issue because this doesn't quite line up with some of the things that I want. So let's move on. Oh, last thing about this image as well is I think it's quite interesting that there's leyline influence in there. And you might say, well, why is that interesting? Well, maybe it's not. It's a suggestion we're deep down and there's, you know, something going on with the ley lines. Maybe some kind of demon is tapping into it. Do you remember at the end of Dragons, Aurene says she'll know if anything messes with the ley lines or the balance of magic? It may even be her that tips us off that something's happening here. Something's coming. Something's crept in deep below the Jade Sea and is now feasting on the magic and she wants us to check it out. You know, something like that. Also, I think this story has to start dealing with Aurene going into the mists, going to sleep, or dying. You know, these next few patches. They've got a lot of ground to cover here, guys. I really want this to be a meaty patch. This has to be a very good patch. If this is, like, one of the weaker Living World patches, this is going to be pretty disastrous. So, fingers crossed we're not about to get a corner or something. Anyway, so, yeah, ley lines were deep down. But also, you know, ley lines should be clean and balanced at the moment. If you remember in Season 2 and Heart of Thorns, when we started killing too many Elder Dragons, the ley lines were supposed to be going crazy. So, you know, seeing them there just makes me think about all that old stuff. Okay, let's deal with the map. Alright, so that might be the idea of like a dungeony experience as you descend into the map. Do you guys remember the Drakkar meta? How you went below the ice and then there was this creature down there? You might get that here, you know, where the meta just takes you deep into the Jade. What about the rest of the map? Well, there's a lot I want to see from this. One thing I'm excited about, again, assuming it's the Jade Sea. The big problem I had with End of Dragons was the way that they bundled the Dragon's End meta onto the Jade Sea map. I think this was a mistake. I think what would have been much better is if they had followed through with their Dragonstorm implementation or their Twisted Marionette implementation, which is that you have a meta, but it's on its own isolated little map that comes up on a timer, and you speak to a character, say, in Arborstone on a helicopter that will take you there. For the Icebrood Saga, that was obviously in Arborstone, in the Eye of the North. I think that would have been a much better format because what that would have done is allow the Jade Sea to exist purely on its own. It could have had hearts there. It could have been like a peaceful map where you do get to, say, fish at the north till to your heart's content, or fish below the jade or whatever, and you're not constantly feeling like, oh god, am I taking a slot from other people? God, are all these big epic high scale events coming on, sort of replacing all the otherwise interesting story? See, I remember just before End of Dragons came out, they did those preview streams of the Jade Sea, and there are some gorgeous places there. Do you know what I think some of those beautiful stuff in the game is? It's in in Dragon's End, where you've got like these flower petals that gently drift down in like some quiet little temple, or you know, they settle on some very still water. There's some really gorgeous stuff going on there. Generally speaking, I don't think End of Dragons looks that good. I think Path of Fire blows out of the water, and Path of Fire is half a decade old now. But some of the best stuff in the X-Pack is in the Jade Sea, and you don't get to appreciate it because it's tied with the most epic, important meta they ever made. I think separating them was the right move. They didn't do that. And maybe it's because they only happened upon this separation idea really late into the development, you know, because the Icebrood Saga only did it with Dragonstorm really right towards the end. But why am I rambling about this now? Because if they're going to do a new Jade Sea, this is their opportunity for that now. We can have the peaceful Jade Sea, the Jade Sea that isn't bogged down by a huge meta that defines everything. What I would rather for this meta is, yeah, it can be big and fun, fight Kanaxai, fight Inhn, whatever, I don't know. But I would like it to, you know, not take forever. I'd rather not like 50% of the map's experience revolves around it. It just comes up every now and then, and you can do it. I would rather it feel a bit more... Fort Aspenwood isn't even a meta, it's just an event chain. But I would rather this thing feel a bit more like Fort Aspenwood than anything else, just so I get that real peaceful Jade Sea with the hearts where I get to indulge in those kinds of assets, which I'm sure that they'll reuse. So that's one thing I'd really like. The other thing, as I mentioned, I want this verticality. I want an underneath layer where we're not immediately the water. It feels bright, it feels glassy, maybe we feel the jade melting, we can get some nice waterfalls and things. But the other thing that I really want from this map is just lots of boating content, loads of sailing content, and I'm not sure how that all lines up. So let's move in. Let's talk about the masteries. I think that the End of Dragons masteries are a bit of a dud right now. But if this was a traditional Guild Wars 2 patch cycle, that could be salvaged by the appending Living World, because those later patches can just expand on them. But now that we know there might not be that many of those, they really have to get going with it fast. So, for example, let's look at fishing. I've actually really fallen in love with fishing at the moment. I really love that fishing farm that you can do in Amnoon and Kaineng at night, where, you know, you've got your scorpions, you get loads and loads of money, and there's all the boats bobbing around, and it's in a beautiful area in POF. I think there's a lot of really cool untapped potential with fishing. But to look at it, you know, there's itemization and stuff we still don't have, like new fishing rods. You can't even get fishing rods with higher fishing power on them just yet. You know, I want to see stuff for that, and I want to see another fishing farm possible on this map. I love what's going on with the fishing with the game at the moment. I think it'd be really cool if we had huge swathes of oceanic water in this map where people can fish. And if that happens to be under the jade as well, that's really cool too. But does that really map with the idea of a zone that's super high and goes super deep before you even get to the water? So I'm not too sure if I've got a good idea there. That's fishing. Otherwise, I think fishing is okay. There's just more system changes I'd like to see with that. But the Siege Turtle, now... Siege Turtle, to me, is a big dud of this expansion. You sometimes see people get on it when they know they're in, like, an open world area where a break bar's coming up. You know, like, if you do your daily Dragonstorm for, like, easy 6 gold or whatever every day, you might see people get on turtles sometimes. But the thing with the turtle is actually something many of us identified before the game even came out. You guys in the comments, I said it on a few videos. The turtle will thrive when there is content that specifically interacts with the turtle. Like, there need to be events and aspects of the new meta that require turtle usage. Now, when End of Dragons came out, not everyone had the turtle. It was gated behind the final meta. This wouldn't have worked back then. People would have been frustrated. It would have locked off easy meta event completion until, like, way too late. But now the devs can do that. So I really want to see heavy turtle stuff, because when else is it going to have its time to shine? If you look at Dragon's End, there are a couple of little events in the meta, like the Prees before the Suwon fight, where the turtle can be used to, like, break some shields. More stuff like that. I really do want to see just lots more stuff like that. The turtle is... I do genuinely get a real kick out of being in the side seat of a turtle. It makes me feel like playing Halo or something, climbing the gunner seat of a Warthog. It is very, very cool. But for me, as a veteran player who doesn't need someone to give me, like, a bunch of POIs and stuff, I want more reason for that thing to exist. And it's do or die, really, with these next couple of patches. So, fingers crossed. The other thing about the turtle too, by the way, and this is, again, something I think they should really lean into, is, let's not forget, what's another big aspect of the turtle? I bet you guys don't even think about this much. I certainly don't. The turtle doesn't swim. It walks on the floor of any kind of aquatic body. Now, that's really interesting, actually, as a mechanic. When have I used that, though? I mean, it's a tiny little novelty. So what I would really like, I mean, if I was designing this meta, I would have a part of this meta go into some water or something. But you've got to, like, fight on the sea floor or something, just so that people walk on their turtles down there. I mean, how cool is that? And you guys might say, well, WP, not everybody has the turtle. Hold on, though. Multiple people can get in the same turtle. So, you know, if there are 50% of the players don't have it at all, they could just get in the side seat of someone else. I mean, that's a cool experience. So I want that. If not, when the map comes out as it expands, because, you know, this is the time for these masteries. Jadebot's the next thing. Jadebot I'm a little bit less interested in. As far as I'm concerned, Jadebot is essentially a power creep mechanism. It's kind of like a gearing mechanism. I'm not actually against that. I quite like grinding for little stats. I quite like spending loads of money on a +5, +9 infusion and stuff. So I kind of like the Jadebot core. Personally, I do think they should... And right now, there's only one type of Jadebot core. It's a Vitality core. So there is this question of, should they do other cores with other attributes? I'm actually all for it. Now, listen, power creep's a big problem, and it keeps ruining old content. And so you'll never find me majorly advocating for power creep in this game. And ArenaNet, I think, have always been cautious about it. You know, they don't want to invalidate Ascended gear and move people off of Berserker and stuff like that. I get it, right? The Jade bot, though, I think can be a bit of an exception to the rule. Like, if they add a Jade bot core that gives you power, or gives you precision, or gives you ferocity, something offensive, right? This would be very exciting for, you know, stat-based players and those of us who want to optimize more. It'd be very exciting. It is a trade-off, because the current vitality you get is really, really nice. And taking people off of that actually will hit them. You know, I didn't play the game very much last year. When I returned, I was astounded by how tanky all my characters felt. Like, everyone feels so tanky in End of Dragons if you get a Jadebot core with Vitality on it, and because of the armor upgrade system. Those two things together have really made the game feel so safe and easy. If they introduce a Jadebot core where, you know, the top rarity is like 100 power, people are going to lose thousands of HP for 100 power. And the game will go back to feeling a bit more like what I feel like it should, you know, in terms of like squishiness and glassiness. So I actually really like this idea. And also, I'll give you guys another argument. Power creep is not good. And there's been loads of power creep in the game. But what you have to understand, there's an instinct, I think, for most people who play MMOs. When they think of power creep, they think of stats, they think of attributes. And they'll say, well, you don't give people another 100 power on top of what they already have. That's ridiculous. You might say that, and I think other MMOs will influence you to say that. But I'm telling you, the real problem with power creep with Guild Wars 2 is balance patches. It's access to boons, it's access to cooldowns, it's access to things that used to be very special and very rare, like super speed, that now just get dumped out all over the place. That's the power creep, okay? It's a balance consideration. 95% of all power creep comes through the balance patches, trying to be enticing and exciting, and always accelerating how much people can do, how fast, to keep as many toys interesting as possible. The idea of adding like 100 power, or even 240 power, even if you want to go as far as 240 power, actually isn't that crazy. If you are a power build with 25 might, you're sitting around a 4,000 power. Current builds are around 4,000. If ArenaNet gives you another 100, it's a drop in the bucket, guys. You know, there's a reason people go for like damage modifiers rather than raw attributes. So it would feel fun. It actually wouldn't affect the game that much. So I'm all for more Jadebot cores. I think that they should be coming in these next patches. Because again, when else are they going to do Jadebot stuff? There's also, by the way, and so I would advocate new cores, but I would advocate nerfs, for example, to the boon spam stuff of the Jadebot. That's what I would say. Also, there's this idea of like exploring around as a Jadebot. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I loved those moments in End of Dragons. I thought they were fantastic, like in the story. So I'd like to see more of that. I want to play as my Jadebot more, especially now, a year later, where a bunch of people have skins and they can fly around as cats and ghosts and stuff. Come on, that's just cool. So, yeah, keep going with that, and maybe even more for research kits, even though I sort of hate that mechanic. Finally, the last mechanic, and again, I think all the masteries, they're all weak. They're all disappointing to me, and they all could be pumped up by this map. Last, we have skiffs. So there is like this Jadebot thing where you can skiff supercharge, and there's this thing where you get 5 people in a skiff, and they all emote, and you can move really quick, and it's faster than a skimmer. When do we use that? Well, I mean, it's a fun idea, but I haven't really touched it much. I really like the idea of this new map having loads of open wide water. Now, that doesn't necessarily gel with tunnels below the Jade. Maybe you could have some cool tunnels that you go through that are nonetheless a bit wide. I want loads of water, one for the fishing stuff. I want like another fishing farm like we have at Amnoon, but in the new map. But also races. I really want to see a skiff race. Just one at least. End of Dragons didn't do that. They did the fishing competitions, which are a bit lame. I really want to see a skiff race where you get, you know, it's like a party-based race. You get 5 people in there and they're all emoting and your boat goes on. That would be so good. And also it would mean that like the supercharger feels interesting. I mean, if they tied that to the meta too, where everybody races, they all get in boats. And imagine you're racing through the tunnels below the Jade. You know, maybe there's a shortcut if you can navigate it. This would be cool, but I want lots of open water so it actually feels like I can boost around on a skiff. See, the big problem with the game at the moment, as a vet, I have a skimmer. The skimmer is so much more maneuverable and comfortable and less tedious to get on that if there's any kind of finesse necessary, then I'm just not going to use the skiff. The skiff can motorboat along real fast. But when I need to turn and stuff, it's just, it's not viable. So this new map needs lots of open water, like oceanic water. And that would be great. And again, you'll see here that people expected End of Dragons to be like the underwater expansion. And then it kind of didn't end up that. But I want that here for the Jade Sea as much as they can get. And if that means loads and loads of stuff below the Jade, cool. Just don't make it too dark and gloomy too much of the time, if that's alright. So, there you go. That's the map. Lastly, just a little bit about the story. I think Inhn is probably going to be a big part of this patch. In fact, there was a gem store update quite recently where they suggested Inhn has gone or is going to Krytan. So Inhn should be in this patch. And again, I think Inhn is a weird character that they seem to really care about the Empress. And they've set up a lot of cool stuff about her and her relationship with June. But what have they done with it, you know? Ostensibly, this character is like the new Togo, right? It's a big character, but she gets one scene in the expansion. One scene, and then she's just gone. Really underutilized, and now there's minimal screen time, so meaty patch with lots of Inhn, I hope. Maybe even Inhn herself is who petitions us to start checking out this weird mystery. Well, I think a great starting point, actually, would be Inhn says, Oni have appeared, something's assassinating people, what is it? So we start looking around the city, trying to figure out why people are getting assassinated. We find out it's demons. We find out a bit more of this Kanaxai stuff. We go to Aurene and say, what's up? And Aurene doesn't even know why, but she can't detect the fact that the magic is getting messed with. So now we're scared. And then we move on. I think that would be a really good launching point for the story. But Inhn needs some kind of big influence. Actually, do you know, I think the coolest story, the story I would like more than anything else, I'll be edgy, okay? The best way that this patch could start would be we open up with Inhn having gone to Krytan to like make peace with modern Krytans. You know, it's a mission of diplomacy. She's off in Krytan land, and the gem store actually hinted at this as being an eventuality. So the patch opens with Inhn doing that, but while she's on Krytan soil, she gets assassinated. She dies, and so this creates a huge amount of tension between the two nations. The purists, the xenophobes back in Cantha are furious and think, you know, these filthy Krytan foreigners have done it. But in truth, something else is afoot. It's these demons, it's the Oni, and that's what our detective agency is investigating. That would be a very cool start to the story. Maybe that's too grim or edgy. I don't know whether they might not do that, but I think that would be a really cool start. And yeah, you've killed Inhn off and she hasn't had much screen time. But as long as you don't tell me to feel sad about it, I think that's fine. That's a cool story. And so yeah, then there's this thing about, you know, what about the monster in Raisu Palace? What about the actual deep sea monster, you know, that started messing around when Suwon woke up? Are they going to even do that this X-Pack now? They could delay that for a long way. And this thing about the Celestial Blessing, the vampires, can they squeeze all of this in? I don't know. And what about Ergos? You know, I really look at Echovald. They had that amazing stuff about the Wardens and the Sylvari and some cool Ergos hints. Is there space for that now? I don't know. So there's been a lot of big, really good, interesting news about Guild Wars 2. And I think it's had a big, over this past week, I think it's had a big impact on what to expect from this next patch. I actually am hyper-focused on this next release. And I think it'll be a really interesting one to watch. So keep an eye on the channel. I will be covering it. And yeah, these are my expectations, hopes, and thoughts, preliminary, for the next release. Once again, guys, I was so happy with the recent videos we did because you guys just sent so many comments. It was amazing. If you guys do that again, I mean, I'll do a Q&A follow up from this. Anything here that you've been prompted to say, let me hear it. I'll read them all. And thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoy. Take care. I'll see you soon.